So thank you once again for attending this webinar. Although I do know it is a requirement, we still appreciate that you are here. Our purpose today is to get you off on a good start with TEA30. And so we'll provide this information and ensure everyone's on the same page, and then also to assist your staff who complete any work related to the TEA grant. Please post questions in the chat and we will answer them as they come up. Do note that this webinar is being recorded, so by agreeing to attend this webinar, you are also agreeing to being recorded. Please do keep your microphone muted if you are not asking a question, and that way we can avoid any background noise. The recording will be posted later on CalRecycle's YouTube channel, and when that link is available, we will make it available to all the participants, whether or not you have been able to attend in person today. So starting with the grant agreement documents. The grant agreement documents contain important compliance information about how to administer the grant. These cannot be changed except by formal amendment signed by both the grantee agency and by CalRecycle. So many of you will be familiar with these documents, the terms and conditions, procedures and requirements, and your approved budget. Please be sure to look over these documents so that you are in compliance. These are the TEA30 milestones. So as you know, today, June 30th, is day one of the TEA30 grant cycle. December 31st is the end of the mid-year billing cycle. February 25th is the due date for the mid-year invoice and the mid-year progress report. And then June 29 marks the end of the grant cycle performance period. June 30th through September 30th is the reporting and the final invoice period. Please submit as soon as possible. You do not need to wait until September 30th to submit your report and your invoice. But September 30th is the final date for the final invoice and progress report. As you saw during the application period, there are 8 budget categories, and we'll be touching on each one. But first, we're going to start with the budget itself. When it comes to the budget, it is understood that at the time of application, it's an estimate. So you might find that you need to modify it or amend it during the grant term. And I'll get into the difference between these two on the next slide. So when it comes to modifying, you need to request a modification in writing to your grant manager. And in that email, you need to communicate 3 pieces of information. Your justification. Why do you need to move the money? Where from? Which line items do you want to take the money from and how much? And then where to? The line items and the amounts you want to move the money to and how much. Your grant manager will reply with either approval, disapproval, or ask some questions. Upon approval, the grant manager will adjust the budget in GMS. Now, BUD mods or budget modifications are when there are changes to category amounts, adding or deleting a line item. So let's get into the difference. Now, this slide goes into detail regarding the difference between modifications and adjustments. I'm not going to read all of this because it's a lot of text, and I know that PowerPoint shouldn't have so much text on one slide, but I wanted this here so that when you received a copy of the slides, you'd be able to refer to this if ever you needed a modification or an adjustment. So just to give an idea, again, modifications are when you're moving funds from one category to another and or when you are adding or deleting a line item. So you also need to have approval for these modifications. Adjustments, on the other hand, are when you're moving funds from within the category without adding or deleting a line item. And you do not need prior approval for adjustments. On to the budget categories, starting with administrative costs. These are costs that are specific to implementing grant activities. There's a 15% cap, and eligible activities include progress reports and payment requests, grant-related communications, such as talking to your grant manager, developing and maintaining a system to capture and report staff time, activities and costs, internal meetings related to TEA. So if you have meetings within your agency in relation to TEA, administrative supervision and evaluation of TEA staff, and also the development of the next cycle's application. For education, there is a 10% cap. And remember that education is for any training that you give to businesses. Any training that you receive is under the training category. So for education, cost for printing and distributing CalRecycle brochures is an eligible cost. These are also available in English and Spanish, and costs for informing businesses and business owners or operators about applicable waste tire laws and regulations, and available compliance resources. Remember, one such visit is allowed. And of course, providing tire-related education to the local conservation course. Under the category of enforcement, there are two subcategories: actions and surveillance, and field patrolling and small cleanup. The first subcategory is actions and surveillance, and eligible costs include conducting and reporting on investigations, researching, identifying, documenting illegal sites, coordinating and working with CalRecycle and other such forces, assisting CalRecycle with investigations and referrals, attending administrative court and or CalRecycle hearings, and coordinating with other agencies to remediate environmental damage due to illegal dumping and storage of waste tires. The second subcategory for enforcement is field patrolling and small tire cleanup. There's a 15% cap, and eligible costs here include time it takes to prepare and plan field patrol, the time spent on follow-up of illegal dumping, and cleanup of small tire piles with 35 or fewer tires on public land, including disposal fees. Remember, private property with more than 500 illegally stored tires must be referred to CalRecycle prior to seeking remediation. Okay. Next, we have operational costs. Here, there's a 10% cap, and eligible costs eligible costs include personal protective equipment, including boots, reflective vests, logo identifying windbreakers, hard hats, gloves, etc. Field equipment, including measuring devices, GPS, cameras, and its accessories, cell phones, mobile Wi-Fi hotspots, cell service, and computers or tablets and their related accessories. Only equipment, supplies, and materials necessary to perform eligible grant activities are reimbursable. And the grantee may claim only the cost of an item that is proportionate to its use in TEA grant activities. So for example, if you get a computer and only half of it is used for TEA and the other half is used for a different program, you would only be able to charge the grant for 50% of its cost. And office space that is used to house T staff can also be charged, again, proportionally to the staff commitment to grant activities. Indirect, always a bit of a tricky thing. Indirect costs are expenses incurred for a joint purpose that are difficult to identify with specific cost objectives or cost centers. So indirect costs are those costs that are not classified as direct. Direct costs can be identified specifically with particular cost objectives, such as grant, contract, project, function, or activity. Indirect costs are harder to link to a grant. In theory, costs like heat, aircon, lighting, accounting, personnel may be charged directly if there were little meters that could record minutes in a cross-cutting manner, but obviously that's impractical. So grantees may charge indirect cost rates not to exceed 20% of approved direct costs and budget, and I'll go more into that on the next slide. Grantees must employ an indirect cost rate that conforms to generally accepted accounting principles and which is prepared by their accounting, finance, or budget office or external accounting contractor. And indirect costs charged to the grant must be consistent with the agency's indirect cost practices, as well as align with the indirect cost allocation plan, or CAP. Okay, let's do an indirect example. So, for example, for the TEA30 grant budget, let's say an agency's TEA grant budget has direct cost budgeted at $100,000. Indirect may then be budgeted at $20,000 because 20% of $100,000 is $20,000. That means that $20,000 is your pot of money. It is all you have because you maxed it at 20%. That's what you have in your pot. Now, if the first invoice, that is the mid-year invoice, shows direct costs of, let's say, for example, $34,000, and the actual agency indirect cost rate, that is your cap, is 43%, the agency may charge up to $14,620 for indirect costs on the invoice, because 43% of 34,000, that's your direct cost, equals 14,620. Now, moving to the final invoice, if the agency charged that full amount of the 43% on the mid-year invoice, that is, if they charged the 14,620 on the mid-year invoice, that means that there is now a 5,380 balance left in the indirect budget line item to charge on the final invoice. Because remember, you had 20,000 at the start minus the amount you charged on the mid-year, and that equals a leftover of 5,380. Again, the agency cannot spend more than 20% cap for indirect costs. Now, let's say on your estimated budget, your indirect amount is at 15%. That means that potentially you could move more money into the indirect budget line item until you reach 20%. If you are already at 20%, then you cannot insert more money into that line item because you've already met the cap. All right, now moving on to the inspections category. Inspections shall be performed in compliance with the CalRecycle Waste Tire Enforcement Manual, such as your priority inspections, never inspected TPIDs, all other active TPIDs that are due for inspections per the manual, previously inspected small quantity generators or SQGs, if approved by your CalRecycle Inspector Liaison. You need to ask your Inspector Liaison for approval. Reasonable expenditures to carry out inspections, reimbursement based on actual time spent, tracking and documentation by TPID of all inspection hours. As mentioned before, training is any education that you receive. You are eligible for up to 8 hours per day of training that you receive. So for example, if you have a 3-day training, you are eligible for 8 hours per day, totaling 24 hours. This 8-hour limit does not include travel time. If you travel for 30 minutes to training, which let's say it takes 8 hours, and you travel 30 minutes back, you can document the 9 hours so long as you make a notation that 8 hours are training and 1 hour is travel. Here's a list of some of the trainings that you may be familiar with, such as the mandatories, roundtable, TTS, new inspector training, this webinar, and some non-mandatories like the Cal EPA sponsored enforcement symposium, the BIA, interviews, health and safety, etc., and then any internal meetings that you have at your agency, such as maybe any internal policies and procedures that you have to train new inspectors or staff members. For transportation, we have a 10% cap. You can use an agency vehicle if your agency has one, your personal vehicle. And please remember that CalRecycle does not set the state rate. We have no control over that, nor do we have control of when that state rate comes out. There are 2 ways to charge vehicle costs. You might use either, but not both. You can either charge mileage, which is either the state rate or your agency's rate, whichever is less, or you can charge by itemized transportation costs like gas, maintenance, insurance, licensing and registration. Okay, those were the categories. Now we're going to get into the payment requests. The inspection priority work plan, also known as the inspection log, is sent to you in the notice to proceed email. And it is for your planning and reference. Excuse me. In carrying out TEA inspections. It does not need to be returned to us with your invoice backup. Seriously, please don't give it to us. When billing for inspection hours, remember that you will not need to submit the priority work plan, also known as the inspection log, with your invoice. And instead, you'll enter the total inspection hours by inspector on the expenditure itemization summary, or EIS. And that's it. Be aware and be forewarned, however, that when an audit occurs, you will still need to have the timesheets that account for each inspector's time, and notes must be associated with that time by TPID. Auditors will aim to ensure that inspections billed during an invoice period were actually inspected during that period. A report will be pulled from WTMS at the time of your invoices being reviewed to ensure that all inspections completed during the invoice period are marked as eligible for payment. When the grant manager finds there are ineligible inspections, they will be reaching out to you to determine whether they were marked ineligible incorrectly by the liaison or marked correctly as ineligible. This means that your grant manager will reach out to you and you will need to consult with your liaison to determine the eligibility of these inspections. The grant manager needs you to let them know if that ineligible inspection was charged or was not charged to the grant. If it was charged to the grant and it is determined to be ineligible, you will need to provide information about the number of hours charged and then deduct that amount from your EIS, your expenditure itemization summary, as those would therefore be disallowed on the invoice. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Enforcement Supervisor Mark Umphris to go over an update on WTMS.
Thanks, Yeli. This is Mark Umphris. I'm supervisor of the Tire Enforcement Section Central Unit. And so one of the things we do is to continuously work with IT to develop the WTMS database. And for you, one of the updates that has been made is that a new report, the Inspection Payment Status Report, has recently been enhanced and is now available to TEA staff. So the report provides information about inspections conducted by, by your inspectors and what the status is of those inspections. Next slide, please. So the image that you see on the screen shows the information that is displayed in the report, which includes a list of inspections, dates of when the inspections were conducted and submitted to CalRecycle, as well as information about the payment eligibility of those inspections that have been reviewed. Next slide. The report has several filter options available, including the inspection status, which is the draft, completed, submitted, or reviewed. Excuse me, the type of inspection and the inspector. So if you wanted to filter it to the individual level, payment approval status, and date ranges for that include like grant cycle, where you can do custom dates as well. By default, all TEA grant staff will only be able to see information for their own county or city's inspections. So for example, Fresno County staff can see inspection information for all of the Fresno County inspections, but are not able to see inspection information for like Monterey County or vice versa. In fact, I think the regulator drop-down menu on here will be set to your city or county based on your login, and you wouldn't be able to change that. Next. So within the report, there's an option to have the results exported to an Excel spreadsheet. And the Excel spreadsheet will have all of the information that was just shown on displayed on the results screen, but it will also have two additional columns that didn't show on that screen. Namely, it's the completed on and the reviewed on dates for when the inspections were set as complete, or when the inspections were reviewed and filed by CalRecycle inspector liaisons. Next slide. So the report is available to you now. Please be aware that the completed, submitted, and reviewed dates for the inspections is only recently being captured. And so you will not see any dates in those columns before this report was published, which I believe was on or near June 13th of this year. So if you run the report now, you will only see dates in those columns up from that date moving forward, but not prior to those dates, to that date. So to access the report within WTMS, you look for the reports button that's on the top right-hand side. And after you click that, you would scroll down and you should see the inspection payment status report listed under the enforcement heading. And next slide. And basically, this is what the report will look like once you open it, with the filter options on top and the results showing on the bottom, along with the export to Excel button. And last slide. And like I mentioned, the report is available now, so check it out and let us know if you run into any issues accessing it.
All right, thank you, Mark. I want to take a quick moment to see if anybody has questions about this, although you can, of course, contact Mark or your liaison at any point.
Gilly, there are no questions in the chat at this point.
Okay, very good then. Thanks again, Mark.
Thank you.
All right, so going to the mileage form itself. CalRecycle provides a mileage form that you can use, and it may be simpler than what your agency uses, but you can use either the CalRecycle form or the agency's form. Either way, just know that CalRecycle auditors will request the vehicle logs to back up your invoice. You want to be sure that you have the ability to verify any mileage charges. The mileage form provided by CalRecycle contains tabs for either shared use vehicles or dedicated use. And again, it is not sufficient for audit purposes. The auditor will want to have mileage log documentation, and you want to make sure that you keep these on file. You can use your agency's form as long as it has the basic same information as the form provided by CalRecycle. Whatever you use, and I want to stress this, you just need to be able to verify any mileage charges. Again, just keep detailed records that backs up what you are giving to CalRecycle when seeking reimbursement. The log provided in your notice to proceed emails will ask for less information than what an audit will ask for. You'll need to be able to have your own records that contains information such as, but not necessarily limited to, a specific date, like, for example, April 4th, 2022, the destination, the mileage from beginning to end, and the purpose. So you can submit your own log or CalRecycle's. This is the shared use tab of the mileage log provided in your notice to proceed emails. These are vehicles that are sometimes used for TEA, sometimes for other programs or purposes that are not TEA related. This includes both agency vehicles as well as personal vehicles. There will be a tab for instructions, and then the next tab will have a blank copy for you to use if you so choose. The purpose column is a drop-down menu, so you can select it and enter it into the cell. At the bottom, it will automatically calculate the total miles. Rate and cost will only be on the EIS. The other portion of the mileage log is for dedicated vehicles, so vehicles that are used only for TEA purposes. In this case, you could select the month using a drop-down menu and then enter in the vehicle information, then the miles. Again, rate and cost will only be on the EIS. The purpose column is also a drop-down menu, so you can select the purpose from there. And in this case, you're selecting the primary purpose. That is the main use of that month's trip. If it was mainly inspections with some training, maybe some enforcement, just put inspections because that was the bulk of it. Your own records that you keep should have specific and more in-depth details, as mentioned before, for audit purposes. And then again, at the bottom, it will automatically calculate the total miles. Payment requests and supporting documents. So the grantee must upload invoice documentation to the payment request tab in GMS. This means the completed payment request form, which is Form 87, signed by an authorized signatory, and any supporting documents, but be sure to keep the originals in your files. There are two invoices that we look to, which is the mid-year and the final. The mid-year dates are June 30th through December 31st, and the final is January 1st through September 30th. But the performance period does end on June 29th. Report writing costs can be charged from June 30th to September 30th. But as mentioned before, please submit your final invoices as early as possible. You don't need to wait until September 30th to turn them in. So if you are familiar with the old personal expenditure summary forms, remember that you do not need to submit these with your invoices. If you're familiar with Field Patrolling Form 229, you do not need to submit those either. And the inspection log, as we talked about, does not need to be sent. If you're wondering why I keep pounding on this, it's because surprisingly, we still get them. So remember, you don't need to turn those in. What you do need is Form 87, the mileage log, the progress report, the expenditure itemization summary, hourly rate document, any invoices, receipts, and other proofs of purchase for equipment that is 500 or more, any certifications of completion if you take any training, and travel itemization form, which is Form 246, only when charging for travel. Now, this here is just to show what the grant payment form, Form 87, looks like. What you see here is page 1, and there are 4 pages total, with the last 2 pages being instructions on how to fill it out. So when you're submitting this, excuse me. When you're submitting this, fill everything out you see here on page 1, and please make sure that the grantee name and address match what is on the grant agreement. We will be checking and they need to match. If they don't, we have to send it back to you to get that fixed. When you submit the form, ensure that at least pages 1 and 2 are submitted. For the EIS, there's no changes to this form, and all personal hours are entered with the name and hourly rate of the employee. For inspections, all associated time, so the time spent doing reports, research, the actual inspection, etc., can go under the inspections category. And then completed inspections are entered into WTMS and need to be approved as eligible for payment by the liaison. Also, if you have more than 1 hourly rate for someone, so for example, let's say their rate at the start of the grant term was $25, then in October, their rate goes up to $30. On the EIS, you'd enter that person's name twice, one showing the $25 rate and one showing the $30 rate. And you would need to make sure that the hourly rate document also shows both rates. So this here is just to show you what the EIS looks like. As you can see, no changes here. And then again, please be sure that the amount entered into GMS matches what is showing on the EIS. At the bottom, you see where it says amount requested and amount entered in GMS. We understand that sometimes there is a difference, and that really just depends on your own agency's system of tracking and accounting. And I know it can get complicated for some folks, which is why, above all, that the amount entered ultimately needs to match. So where it says amount entered in GMS, that amount needs to match what is in GMS. And then after June 30th, only report writing and invoicing costs may be charged. So you can't do an inspection on June 30th, since June 29th was the last day of performance. So for expenditures, remember that proof of payment is required for 500 or more purchases, and acceptable proofs include receipts, invoices, canceled checks, documents that contain pertinent information. And then also remember that if the grantee is only claiming a portion of the invoice, then that amount billed to the grant needs to be highlighted. So let's have a look at what that looks like. So here's an example of an invoice. All the information that, would need to be here, who it's going to, who the invoice is for. But then you'll see also that the total amount is the $34,530.80. This is the total, but it is not what is charged to the grant, only a portion. So you want to make a handwritten note or send a separate, document or something that tells us that the full amount was not charged to the grant and that tells us how much was charged. For travel, you'll want to make sure that you have the following backup or supporting documents, such as training certificates, airline invoice, hotel folio showing zero balance, and the name of everyone for whom you are requesting reimbursement. So here's what the travel expense log looks for, the log form, what it looks like. And notice that everything is itemized out and the total, which is 550, matches what is in the EIS, and that is shown in the red box under the training category. So what is on the EIS needs to match what is on the travel expense form. Receipts, such as for a hotel, as you see here, would show a $0 balance. This shows that it's been paid for because we can only reimburse for expenses incurred, not for expenses in advance. And then when requesting travel reimbursement, be sure to check out this link provided here to know what is the most current eligible amounts are for lodging, transportation, and meals. Remember that meal reimbursement rates are maximums, not allowances. In the event of an audit, grantees must be able to produce receipts substantiating the amount claimed. This here is the link to the YouTube tutorial on how to submit a payment request. Please have a look at it. It's a very good resource, even if it's just being used as a refresher. Now, just a few notes regarding submitting a payment request. And I say just a few notes because that tutorial really is excellent. After you log in, you'll land on the GMS homepage. Click on the grant management to access the administrative portion of the grant. This is where you can submit payment transactions and the progress reports. Now, when you're done submitting, or if you need to go back to the transaction, maybe you forgot to submit, or maybe you need to make an edit, then after you've clicked onto your grant under grant management, you'll first land on the summary page. Click on the payment request tab and it will take you to the page you see here on the screen where all your transactions and summaries are. The little blue numbers are actually links to that specific transaction. So you want to click on that number link to access the details for that transaction. Okay. But wait, you are not done until you've hit the submit button. So please remember to submit once you have finished uploading everything. The instructions that you see here to complete a payment request are also in GMS. This is a screenshot from GMS. After everything is entered and uploaded, again, please hit the submit button. If you're not sure if you did, you can always go back to the payment request tab and look at the transaction summary. If the status shows pending, the payment request was not submitted. If it shows submitted, then it was. When payment requests are successfully submitted, your grant manager receives a notification and can therefore know that it is time to review. Now, if the button is inactive, if it's grayed out, that means that all the required documents have not been uploaded. So you can go back and check the document type to see what you need to submit. And then when all is good, all is done, click submit transaction. All right, now the evaluation part of the grant. So in T29, an updated progress report had been sent out and no changes had been made since then. The progress report and the final report track grantee activities, accomplishments and challenges, supports the payment request, and evaluates grantee performance. The first tab of the progress report is the instructions. So please refer to this tab if you have a question about how to report your data. You can, of course, also contact your grant manager, but please do have a look at this to help you out. So here are some of the tabs, and we will go through them. We are looking at the finals tabs, but the information is largely the same for the mid-year as well. And as a reminder, fill out the contact information for the report you are working on. And when the report has been completed, have your authorized signatory sign your report. Either they print it out and sign it, or they use an e-signature, and then you upload that to the reports tab. Be sure to also fill out the expenditure period dates. Then you'll also please briefly answer the executive summary questions and check the boxes that apply under other programs. Now, when you fill in the inspection data, please make sure your information reconciles with your original priority report and the WTMS data management system. So for example, if you're reporting that you did 50 inspections, then that also needs to be showing in WTMS. The columns in light gray that are labeled mid-year and total on the final tab 2 will automatically populate. Only enter data in the center column in the white cells. The dark gray cells will also auto-populate, so no numbers are needed to be entered in those cells. And then if you know of any discrepancies, please do reach out to your grant manager. Now, if you've indicated that you had any training on tab 2, which is the tab that we saw on the previous slide, then please be sure to submit the details of that training on this tab. The progress report template is available on the summary tab in GMS, and it is also given to you in your notice to proceed emails. So again, if at any point in time during the grant term you need a document, please check your notice to proceed emails. And then these reports should be uploaded to the reports tab in GMS. CalRecycle has some tutorial videos on GMS, so do check those out. at the link provided on the left part of the screen, which has all these wonderful tutorials. These links are also provided online. Yes, Derek.
Yoli, I'm not sure if I missed it, but did you explain about turning page 1 of the report, the evaluation report, into a PDF for signature?
Not directly. So here, let me go back real quick. So going back to this page, again, you want your authorized signatory to sign it, and that means you can print it out and sign it, or as Derek mentioned, turn it into a PDF, and then you can sign it electronically as well. And instructions on how to do that, on how to sign the progress report, will be included in the notice to proceed email.
And we have one question for you, Yoli.
Sure.
If I provided training to a coworker, how do I log in the form? Final tab 3.
So let's go to that. So name of training can be however you name that training. Maybe it's internal or new inspector, new staff member. For mandatory for CalRecycle purposes, it would be no, because CalRecycle is not mandating that. Then you put in the date, put the description or reason for training, such as new inspector or, new admin, staff member, who the person was, what their title is, their rate per hour, the amount requested for registration, and the training cost, if applicable, and then the number of personnel hours requested. Typically, you wouldn't use per diem unless you were traveling outside, but for the purposes of this question, you wouldn't need it.
So there's a follow-up comment, but CalRecycle is requiring it. So if this is training, inspector training for a brand new inspector, and your CalRecycle liaison has approved you to do that training, then yes, it would be a required training.
Correct.
Would count as a required training. So.
Apologies. I was referring to any internal training that you do on your own. But yes, if you are having a new inspector, in which case you are approved, as Derek said, for that CalRecycle training, then yes, it would be mandated. Mm-hmm. Anything else? Okay, hearing none. All right, just a few helpful hints here. Please read your grant agreement terms and conditions and procedures and requirements carefully. There's a lot of good information in there, and it will really help make things streamlined if you have a look at those and know where you're coming from. But when in doubt, ask your grant manager. Now, when you're in doubt about inspections, you can ask your inspector liaison. And it's always good to track your activities and personnel time often, so you're not having to do it all at once at the end. Don't leave money on the table. We want you to be reimbursed for all eligible expenses within your approved budget. So if you have questions about eligibility, if you're not sure, please ask your grant manager. If you need a budget modification to accommodate unexpected expenses, again, ask your grant manager if you're unsure how to do that process, or ask your grant manager for that budget modification request. So some ways that money is left is by essentially not charging indirect costs, admin costs, for space, for mileage, or collaborative meetings that involve tea activity. Anything tea related can be eligible. And then for technical assistance and support, contact your grant manager for issues related to budget, grant administrative questions or reimbursement questions, and then contact CalRecycle inspector liaisons for inspections, enforcement, and training related questions. Okay, I'm going to take a moment here to ask if there are any questions.
Yolanda, I just have a quick question.
Sure.
Regarding training. So if we have like a senior inspector who is training a new inspector, would the senior inspector bill that as education or as training as well?
That would be considered training.
Okay,
Yep. Education is any training that you give to a business. So
Okay.
outside of your agency. Mhm.
thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Nope. Okay. Well
Nothing in
then,
the chat.
oh, I'm sorry.
Nothing in the chat, Yoli.
Okay, great. So here are just some web links to resources that are available online. And again, these will be made available when you receive the slide deck. And here's our contact information. So again, I am the T program lead, and Wendy Box is our evaluation lead for T, and Derek Link is the T grant program supervisor. For your inspector liaisons, you can locate your contact at the webpage provided at the link below. And that's all I have. So thank you again very much for attending. If at any point in time you have any questions, you can always let me know, let your grant manager know. And yes, you can use the time that you spent today for today's webinar. You can charge that to T30's grant.
Yoli, just one other note I want to make before
Sure.
everybody goes. I just want to thank you on behalf of CalRecycle for the good work you're doing to help keep your community safe with respect to waste tar enforcement. It's very much appreciated by the department. We applaud you. Thank you very much.
Yes, very much so. I want to echo Derek's sentiments. Thank you so much for all the work that you do, and it is a pleasure working with you. So thank you again for attending, and let us know at any point in time if you have any questions.